The laughter started when my brother saw my uniform hanging over the back of my chair. It was an old navy blue police uniform, faded at the shoulders and worn thin around the cuffs. I hadn't worn it on duty in years, but I still kept it carefully folded in a garment bag because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. My brother lifted the sleeve between 2 fingers and laughed. "You're still keeping this?" Everyone at the dinner table turned toward me. I looked at the uniform, then at my brother, then at the people I had spent most of my life trying to impress. I had been a police officer for 27 years. I had walked into homes where families were screaming, stood between frightened children and dangerous men, and spent nights sitting in my patrol car wondering whether I had done enough. But none of those moments prepared me for the way my own family looked at me that night. My brother dropped the sleeve. "Come on, Claire. You have to admit it. You could have done something bigger with your life." I smiled, not because it was funny, because I had learned a long time ago that sometimes silence tells you more about people than an argument ever could. What my family didn't know was that the uniform wasn't just an old piece of clothing. It was the reason one of them was alive. And 10 minutes later, when someone knocked on my brother's front door, the person standing outside was carrying proof of exactly what I had sacrificed for this family. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 50 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed being strong meant protecting the people you loved even when they didn't understand the sacrifices you made for them. That night, I learned something different. Sometimes protecting people means finally allowing them to see the truth. I grew up in a family where success had a very specific definition. My father believed success meant money. My mother believed it meant respectability. My brother, Daniel, believed it meant having a title people recognized. And then there was me. I became a police officer. My father never understood it. He wanted me to go to university, earn a business degree, and eventually work beside Daniel in the family construction company. Instead, at 23, I joined the police academy. I remember telling my father over dinner. He put his fork down. "You want to be a cop?" "I do." "Why?" I thought about that question for a long time. "Because I want to do something that matters." He shook his head. "Everything matters if you're paid enough for it." At the time, I thought he was simply disappointed. And years later, I realized my father had never understood sacrifice because he had spent his entire life measuring everything in terms of what it produced. My career produced something he couldn't put in a bank account. People who were alive because someone showed up. Children who knew someone cared. Victims who finally had the courage to speak. Families who got answers. And sometimes, just sometimes, people who got another chance. Daniel never understood that either. He was 7 years older than me, and for most of our childhood, he was the golden child. He went into the family business. He expanded it. He bought a large house. He drove expensive cars. He joined charity boards. People called him successful. Whenever I came home after a long shift with tired eyes and bruises from some incident I'd rather forget, Daniel would smile and say things like, "Or still chasing criminals?" I usually laughed. I didn't want conflict. Maybe that was my first mistake. I became so good at keeping the peace that I forgot peace and silence aren't the same thing. My mother was different. She never mocked my career. She didn't always understand it, but she respected it. Whenever I worked overnight shifts, she'd leave food in my refrigerator. Whenever I got promoted, she was the first person to call. And whenever my father criticized me, she would quietly tell me, "You don't need him to understand you." I believed her. Then my mother died. That was 3 years before the dinner I'm telling you about. After she died, something changed inside our family. Daniel became increasingly controlling about my father's affairs. My father became quieter, and I became more distant, not because I didn't care, because every conversation with Daniel somehow turned into a competition. Who had achieved more? Who had sacrificed more? Who had made the family proud? I stopped trying to win. Then came the family reunion. Daniel had organized it at his house. There were about 20 people there. Family, friends, cousins, business partners. People who had known us since childhood. The house was enormous. Glass walls, marble floors, a backyard bigger than the first apartment I had ever rented. I arrived wearing a simple black dress. My uniform was in a garment bag because earlier that day, I had been cleaning out a storage room at home. I wasn't planning to show it to anyone, but Daniel saw it. He pulled it from my hand. "What's this?" "My old uniform." He opened the bag. Someone laughed. Then someone else made a joke. And suddenly I was standing there while people I had known my entire life were treating 27 years of my life like a costume. Daniel held the jacket up. "You actually kept this?" "Yes." "Why?" I shrugged. "Sentimental," he smiled. "Claire, you're 50 years old. It's time to let some things go." I looked at him. "Some things are worth remembering." He laughed. "That's exactly your problem." Someone asked what he meant. Daniel turned toward the room. "She thinks being a police officer makes her special." I didn't respond. He continued. "While the rest of us were building something, Claire was running around in this thing." A few people laughed nervously. I could feel my face getting warm, but I stayed quiet. Then Daniel said something that hurt more than everything else. "She could have been successful." I looked at him. He was smiling, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired, deeply tired, because suddenly I realized that after 27 years, my brother still had no idea who I was. He thought my uniform represented everything I had failed to become. He had no idea what it represented to me. I took the jacket from his hand. "You should be careful what you call failure." His smile disappeared. "What does that mean?" "Nothing." I folded the uniform, then placed it back into the garment bag. The room became quiet. Someone changed the subject. Dinner continued. But I could feel Daniel watching me. He knew I was upset. He just didn't know why. Around 9 o'clock, I went outside. I stood near the pool, looking at the lights reflecting on the water. That's when I heard my father behind me. "You shouldn't let him get to you." I turned around. My father looked older than I remembered. "Does he ever get to you?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence told me enough. "Dad?" He looked away. "I've made mistakes." I smiled sadly. "We all have." "No," he said. "You don't understand." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked back inside. I watched him go. That was strange. But I had learned something in police work. When someone changes the subject too quickly, there's usually a reason. I didn't know what it was yet. 10 minutes later, I was standing inside Daniel's living room when the doorbell rang. Daniel looked irritated. "Who is that?" No one answered. The bell rang again. He walked toward the door. I followed without knowing why. He opened it. A man stood outside. He was in his early 60s. Gray hair, dark coat. He looked directly at me, then at Daniel. Then he said something I will never forget. "Claire Morgan?" I nodded. "Yes." He swallowed. "My name is Thomas Reed." I didn't recognize him. He held a thick brown envelope in his hands. "I've been trying to find you for 11 years. And Daniel suddenly stepped forward. "Who are you?" Thomas looked at him. "You're Daniel?" And my brother's face changed. Only for a second.
But I saw it.
The same kind of micro-expression I had seen thousands of times during interviews. Recognition, fear, then control. "I don't know what you're talking about." Yes, Thomas looked at me again. "Your mother asked me to give this to you if I ever found you." And everything around me seemed to become quiet. "My mother?" He nodded. "She told me there would come a time when you needed to know what happened." I looked at Daniel. He had gone completely pale. "Dad?" I said. My father was standing across the room. He looked at the envelope. Then he closed his eyes. And that's when I knew. Whatever was inside that envelope had something to do with my family. Thomas handed it to me. My fingers felt cold. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed me standing beside a police cruiser. I was young, maybe 24. My hair was shorter. My uniform looked almost new. I stared at the photograph. Then I turned it over. There was handwriting on the back. My mother's handwriting. "Claire saved Daniel's life that night." I stopped breathing. I looked at my brother. He looked away. "Saved his life from what?" I asked. Nobody answered. Thomas spoke quietly. Your brother was involved in a serious accident 11 years ago. I remembered. I had always been told Daniel had lost control of his car on a wet road. He survived. The other driver did not. I remembered the funeral. I remembered Daniel's injuries. I remembered my father telling everyone it was a tragic accident. Thomas continued. That wasn't the whole story. Daniel suddenly shouted, that's enough. I turned towards him. No, he stared at me. I held up the photograph. For once you're going to let me hear it. And my father sat down. Thomas opened the envelope again. Inside were copies of old reports, medical records, photographs, and a statement. I read the first page, then the second. My stomach tightened. 11 years earlier, Daniel had been driving home late at night. He had been drinking. He lost control of his vehicle. He crossed the center line. Another car was coming toward him. The other driver swerved. The crash was fatal. Daniel survived, but the official report stated there was insufficient evidence to determine whether alcohol had contributed to the accident. I looked at Thomas. Why? He looked at my father, then back at me, because the evidence was changed. My heart dropped. Changed by who? Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. I looked at my father. He started crying. I had never seen my father cry. Not at my mother's funeral. Not when Daniel nearly died, not once. But now tears were running down his face. I did it, he whispered. Daniel stood frozen. I stared at my father. What did you do? I called someone. Who? A friend in the department. My chest tightened. He continued. I thought I was protecting Daniel. I looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Then my father said something that shattered 27 years of my understanding of my own career. The officer who was first on the scene was you. I felt dizzy. I remembered that night. I remembered being called to the accident. I remembered the rain, the broken windshield, the smell of gasoline. I remembered seeing Daniel's car. I remembered seeing him being taken away in an ambulance. But I had never known the full details. I had been told later that another officer had taken over the investigation because I was emotionally involved. I had accepted that explanation. My father looked at me. You were there before anyone else. I couldn't speak. Daniel finally said, Claire. I turned toward him. You knew? He looked down. Yes. The room felt smaller. How long? Since that night. I laughed. It was a strange sound, almost a sob. 27 years I spent learning to recognize lies. I looked at him. And you lied to me for 11. Daniel wiped his face. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of losing everything. I shook my head. You already had everything. He didn't answer. I looked at my father. You let me believe I had simply been unlucky. My father whispered. I was trying to protect our family. I stared at him. No. My voice became quieter. You were trying to protect your reputation. He cried harder, and for the first time, I realized something painful. My family hadn't protected me. They had protected themselves. Thomas stepped forward. There's more. I looked at him. He removed another document. This is from your mother. I read it. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter. My mother had written it shortly before she died. She explained that she had discovered what happened years earlier. She had spent years trying to convince my father to tell me. He refused. She had also discovered that Daniel had been carrying the guilt. He wasn't proud of what happened. He had simply been too afraid to admit it. Then I reached the final paragraph. My mother wrote, Claire, I know you will want to punish them, but please don't become someone you don't recognize. Your strength has never been in making people afraid of you. It has always been in seeing the truth and choosing what to do with it. I couldn't continue reading. I folded the letter. For years, I had imagined my mother's last gift to me would be something sentimental. Instead, she had left me the truth, and the truth hurt more than I expected. I walked outside. I sat on the steps. My brother came after me. He sat several feet away. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. I looked at him. Are you? Yes. Then tell me why. He swallowed. Because I was scared. That's not enough. He looked at the ground. I thought Dad could fix it. And when you found out what he'd done, I was already trapped. I shook my head. No, Daniel. You weren't trapped. He looked at me. You were afraid. He nodded, yes. I took a breath. There's a difference. He started crying. I didn't hug him. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't something you owe someone simply because they finally told the truth. I went back inside. My father was still sitting in the same chair. I stood in front of him. Did you know what happened to the other driver's family? He nodded, yes. Did you ever speak to them? No. Did Daniel? My father looked at him. Daniel shook his head. No, I closed my eyes. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. Not revenge, not humiliation, truth. The following week, I contacted the appropriate authorities. I did not use my position to influence the investigation. I did not access confidential systems. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply provided the evidence I had received. The case was reopened. The old records were reviewed. The truth became part of the official record. There were consequences, not the dramatic kind people imagine from movies. Real consequences. My father lost the respect of people who had trusted him. Daniel had to face questions he had avoided for 11 years. The family business suffered because the truth became public. And the victim's family finally received an explanation. That mattered most to me. Months later, I visited the family. I didn't know what to say. The man's widow listened quietly. Then she asked me one question.
Why did it take so long?
I couldn't lie, because people were afraid. She looked at me. Are you afraid? I thought about it. Yes. She nodded. Good. I was surprised. She continued. Fear means you understand what this costs. I never forgot that. My relationship with Daniel changed. Slowly. Painfully. We didn't become close overnight. There were arguments. There were silences. There were days when I didn't answer his calls. But eventually he began taking responsibility for what he had done. Not because he wanted forgiveness. Because he finally understood that remorse means nothing if it doesn't change your behavior. My father changed too. He sold the company. He donated much of the money to a road safety organization. He told me once that it wasn't enough. I agreed. Some damage can't be repaired completely. You can only stop causing more. As for me, I kept the uniform. The same one Daniel had laughed at. But I no longer keep it hidden in a garment bag. I framed it. Yeah, no, it's hanging in my hallway now. Not because I'm proud of the uniform itself. I'm proud of what it represents. The woman I was before my family learned to measure my worth. The woman who believed service mattered. The woman who didn't have all the answers. The woman who made mistakes. The woman who sometimes came home exhausted and cried where nobody could see. The woman who kept going anyway. A few months after the investigation ended, Daniel came to my house. He stood in the hallway looking at the framed uniform. He smiled sadly. I was wrong. I looked at him. About what? Everything. I didn't say anything. He touched the frame. You really loved this job. I did. Do you still? I smiled. I love what it taught me. What did it teach you? I thought about my mother, my father, Daniel, the accident, the family we had been, the family we were becoming. That truth isn't always kind, I said. But lies are never kindness? He nodded, then he hugged me. This time I hugged him back. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, but because I finally understood that. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to let what happened decide who you become. Today, that old uniform hangs in my hallway. People who visit sometimes ask why I kept it. I tell them the truth, because it reminds me of who I was when I first learned what courage meant. Courage wasn't standing in front of danger. I'd done that plenty of times. Courage was standing in front of the people you loved and telling them the truth when the truth could destroy everything. And sometimes courage was something even harder. It was knowing the truth and choosing not to become cruel because of it. My family once laughed at that uniform. They thought it represented a small life, a life without money, without status, without success. They were wrong. That uniform represented 27 years of showing up when someone needed help, It represented every frightened child I had comforted, every victim I had listened to, every night I had worked while other families slept, every sacrifice nobody in my family ever saw, and most importantly, it reminded me of something my mother understood long before I did. You don't measure a person's life by what they own. You measure it by what remains better because they were there. I used to think my family had underestimated me. Now I realize something different. They never really knew me, and maybe that's the saddest part, because sometimes the people who are closest to us can spend years looking directly at us and still never see who we are.